Hey guys, I bet you architecture lovers will like this video. This is our video for argument seminar in summer semester. We choose Bestiary of Smiljan to construct our argument. The synthesis of the three sections of the argument is a complex but a powerful one to both make a conclusion of years of author study and argue with his projects. Smiljan argued that drawing is a process of spatial and temporal dissolution where interior and exterior are entangled underward through their cracked walls and their ruined roofs. It's reasonable for an architect and an artist to think so because they deal with stuff that dissolve themselves in a wider context. In this way, to represent the author's mind in a certain narrative sequence. From the study course of the author, we can see that vagabonds do so to contribute his collection into a table. Artists do so to compose iconographic paintings to demonstrate different layers of space and thoughts. Architects do so to draw the fragments of his study and human's memory into a delicate work. Like Piranesi's series of etchings of prison, the engraving of Campo Marzio plan is also the main sources of imagination, where the images of ancient Rome provoked by the existing ruins. The Campo Marzio plan is then the iconographic geometric iterations of transformation and collaging of memory fragments. To some degree, Campo Marzio plan is the palimpsest of Piranesi's interpret memory. This is pretty similar to other artworks in other genres. For example, the montage of the sequence of scenes in a film is actually the palimpsest of the narrator's memory, and also the collage of the architectural reproduction of an architect's thoughts, which is an important strategy of representation. So I think in some way, palimpsest and the representation can be equal to each other in terms of defining and determining the process of reproducing the thoughts of an artist and a narrator. That reminds me of the nuance of representation and presentation, or we can say the difference of reproduction and production. It is interesting to see these two artist drawings in the same age and had the same title of their paintings, the deconstruction of Pompeii. As a fine artist, John Martin vividly colored and detailed oil painting to imagine the extent of the disaster when the volcano Mount Vesuvius erupted. That is a kind of repeating the time, frozen time. While Piranesi's architectural drawing, he intervenes the time by reconstructing Pompeii in his engravings. The elevation of the inside wall of the ruins of the castle and the events of the external details related to the bed and fistula's water distribution. As an architectural painter, sculptor, Piranesi was against the rigid rules. Campo Marzio plan evolved from the endeavor, which is the extensive use of historic and literary sources. This relates the Renaissance objective urban reconstruction, which was to provide an image of ancient Rome, and this imagination had a role in urban reconstruction. Piranesi's aim in Campo Marzio was this to provide an image of ancient Rome. So there was a similar image of ancient Rome in the historical consciousness of the Renaissance and Baroque. Therefore, in the use of these malleable memory fragments, Piranesi was able to extend and interpret within the innovative boundaries of the rules of the ancients. So for me, in Campo Marzio, Piranesi invented ruins based on his study of antiquity. He provides collections of fragmented images, which is composed by iconographic format. That also brings into my mind the third dimension of time in architecture, urban reconstruction, and other artworks. Because each piece is readable, it can be searched for its origin, bring the readers into the memories of the author, or into these ruminations and reflections of the author. Actually, in other genres of artworks, the dimension of time has already been used widely and usually as the main strategy for constructing different sequences of narratives. In Kuleshov's experiment, the technique demonstrates the inherent power of montage as a primary tool in the manipulation of the viewer's perception. Cinema consists of fragments, and it is their combination rather than their content that is essential in evoking and triggering different emotions. Then Bernard Toomey brought it to the table of this strategy in his Manhattan transcripts. This transcripts tries to offer different reading architecture in which space, movement, and events are independent, yet stand in a new relationship to one another so that the conventional components of architecture are broken down and reviewed along different axes. Back to our reading, to the Pronaces invent ruin of ancient Rome based on the current ruin in his age, to the archaeological and architectural experiment, we're convinced that this experiential and unstable strategy of reconstructing narratives and the fragile construction has so much meaning to Smiljan. Because in the reading, he argued that the fragile construction takes on the colors of the landscape like the body of vagabond made into the city. But I would say that it does have some meaning when putting these fragments together and in some way for a kind of time sequence through different kinds of forms like iterations of geometries or juxtaposition of photographs. But when readers read them, it's more of a visual experience. On the one hand, for people who just use the space of architecture, what they pay attention to or care about is the programs and whether it is reasonable to arrange these programs in a certain order. And on the other hand, I would argue that even though every piece of these fragments had the meaning itself, but it is possible that their collection will lose something when they put together. For example, architects and artists' decision of organizing these mismatched fragments will have a strong influence on the way of representation. It is more of a personal thing, I think. Their preference is hard to judge whether this is reasonable and that is irrational. So, if this combining process is not reasonable enough, it's hard to judge whether the whole process is rigorous, like most of scientific disciplinary. But I do think it is where architecture is so charming as a form of art. Elements as reconstruction material will remain as the same, but their collection form can be of rich forms. That's why I would argue that the role of organizing these elements can also be an element of design or reconstructing the memory. And we can actually trace back the individual piece. So that's why I think Smiljan valued the vagabonds, valued the ruins, because every single piece had the origin of the city. So when they're putting together with certain rules, they naturally create a relationship with the city context and the territorial narrative. Next, we will be back to the main argument, which includes the spatial and temporal dissolution of a fragile structure. Temporal dissolution has been discussed in the first part. In terms of the space dimension of architecture, its spatial dissolution embodied itself in the mutual relationship between interior and exterior. This will introduce another reading to Pronaces etching by Smiljan. The built elements open and are divided, taking the sublime scale of nature, its proportions and its inhuman time. Nothing fits, and the construction elements overlap in the air. Then, by citing studies of his own theories and others, he argues for his projects.